Have you ever noticed that the people who treat you the best are rarely the ones who keep you awake at night? Instead, it's often the person who left questions unanswered, the person who sent mixed signals, the person who almost chose you, the person who disappeared before the story felt finished. And no matter how much time passes, your mind keeps returning to them. You replay conversations, you imagine alternate endings, you wonder what they were thinking, what they meant, what would have happened if one thing had gone differently. It's easy to assume this means they're your soulmate, or that you're deeply in love, but in many cases that's not what's happening at all. Because the reason you can't stop thinking about someone is often far more psychological than romantic. And once you understand why, their grip on your mind starts to make a lot more sense. The mistake most people make. Most people assume that if someone occupies their thoughts constantly, that person must be incredibly important. But the human brain doesn't obsess over what it understands, it obsesses over what it can't resolve. Think about a song getting stuck in your head, or a movie that ends without explaining what happened. The brain hates unfinished stories. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as the Zeigarnik effect. We tend to remember unfinished experiences more vividly than completed ones, and relationships are no different. The people who stay in our minds are often the people who left us with unanswered questions, not because they were perfect, but because our brain is still searching for closure. The power of uncertainty. One of the strongest psychological drivers of obsession is uncertainty. When someone clearly likes you, your mind can relax. When someone clearly doesn't like you, eventually your mind can move on. But when someone sends mixed signals, everything changes. Maybe they seemed interested, then distant, warm one day, cold the next, present one week, gone the next. And suddenly your brain starts working overtime, trying to decode them, trying to predict them, trying to solve them. The uncertainty becomes addictive, not because uncertainty feels good, but because the brain becomes fixated on finding an answer. And sometimes the search for the answer becomes stronger than the connection itself. They become a symbol. What's interesting is that after enough time passes, you're often no longer thinking about the actual person. You're thinking about what they represent. Maybe they represent a future you imagined, a relationship that never happened, a version of yourself that felt hopeful, a chance you never got to take. Over time, reality fades and imagination fills in the gaps. You stop remembering who they were, you start remembering who they could have been, and those are two very different things. The real person may have had flaws, limitations, incompatibilities, but the version that lives inside your mind has no such restrictions, which makes it much harder to let go. The role of emotional intensity. There's another reason certain people stay with us. Emotion strengthens memory. The stronger the emotional experience, the more deeply it's stored. This is why you can barely remember ordinary days from 5 years ago, but you can remember a single text message that changed everything. You can remember where you were, how you felt, what they said. The emotions attached to an experience act like a spotlight, and relationships often create some of the strongest emotions humans experience: hope, fear, desire, rejection, anticipation, longing. When all of those emotions become attached to one person, the memory becomes incredibly difficult to ignore, even when the relationship itself was brief. When it's really about you. Sometimes the person isn't the thing you're struggling to let go of. Sometimes it's the feeling, the validation they gave you, the version of yourself you became around them, the possibility they represented. This is why two people can experience the exact same rejection and react completely differently. One moves on, the other thinks about it for years. Because the pain isn't always about losing the person. Sometimes it's about what the loss means. Maybe it triggered feelings of abandonment. Maybe it reopened an old wound. Maybe it challenged your sense of worth. And if that's the case, no amount of analyzing them will give you the answer you're looking for. Because the real question isn't about them, it's about you. How to finally let go. Most people try to stop thinking about someone by forcing themselves to not think about them, which rarely works. The mind doesn't respond well to suppression. In fact, the harder you try not to think about something, the more attention you give it. Instead, it helps to ask a different question. Not, why can't I stop thinking about them, but what am I still trying to understand? What answer am I still waiting for? What feeling am I still hoping they'll give me? What story am I refusing to let end? Because once you identify what's unfinished, you stop chasing the person and start addressing the real issue underneath, and that's where healing usually begins. Sometimes the people who occupy the most space in our minds aren't the loves of our lives. They're simply the people who left behind the biggest questions, the biggest uncertainties, the biggest unfinished chapters. And understanding that difference can be incredibly freeing. Because closure doesn't always come from another conversation. Sometimes it comes from finally understanding why you needed one in the first place. If you've ever found yourself unable to stop thinking about someone, the answer may have less to do with them than you think, and more to do with the story your mind is still trying to finish.